Chosen one, they made one fatal mistake when they woke you up, and now your adversaries are panicking because all are experiencing ultimate punishment for harming you. The individuals who dedicated their energy to pulling you down are in a complete freefall, watching their finances, health and alliances crumble as a direct result of the energy they directed toward your destruction. You did not have to lift a finger. While they were waiting for you to hit the rock bottom they engineered, you found bedrock and began building an empire. This is where it actually begins, not with you struggling, with them choosing. That is the truth most people never tell you. Before anything happened to you, a decision was made, cold, deliberate and quiet. Someone looked at you, at your light, at your potential, at the energy you carried without even trying, and made a choice. The choice was not to compete with you, not to grow alongside you, not to build something of their own. They chose you as the mission. They chose you as the target. They organized their obsession around you, as though pulling you down were a legitimate life's purpose. That is how this begins. Not with your weakness, but with your power, and with someone who could not stand to be near that power without wanting to extinguish it. Here is the first thing you need to understand. This person was not a stranger who wandered into your life by accident. The people closest to you, blood family or chosen family, carry the deepest access to who you are, and there is almost always someone inside that circle who was supposed to be safe, who was supposed to be genuinely for you, who performed warmth at the right moments, showed up to the right occasions, and said the right things whenever witnesses were present. The mask was convincing. The consistency of the performance was remarkable, and underneath it all, like a cold current running beneath still water, something was fundamentally wrong. The damage being directed at you had been building for a long time, long enough that when you finally started feeling its effects, you could not immediately identify the source. You thought you were imagining things. You told yourself you were being too sensitive. You questioned your own perception before you questioned their behavior. That self-doubt was not a personal failing. It was a deliberate outcome they had been cultivating the entire time. But here is what matters most at the beginning of this. You were chosen because you were exceptional, not despite what you carried, but because of it. The sovereign energy in you, the light that does not collapse under pressure, the inner core that bends without breaking, was something they could not manufacture in themselves. They could not acquire it, and so they made the decision that if they could not have it, they would dedicate themselves to ensuring you could never fully use it. They had absolutely no idea what they were starting. Here is the detail most people overlook entirely. The very act of targeting you was an involuntary confession. You do not obsess over something insignificant. You do not construct elaborate campaigns against someone who poses no real threat. Every move made against you was, beneath all the hostility, a form of distorted acknowledgement. They recognized your magnitude before you fully claimed it yourself. That recognition, twisted and poisoned as it was, is the first gift concealed inside everything they did to you. The opposition against you was not casual, it was constructed with intention. There was a central figure, one person at the origin point of it all. This was the person whose envy ran oldest, whose obsession ran deepest, whose personal investment in keeping a ceiling over your life was most intense. This person was not simply difficult or emotionally unavailable. The energy they carried was genuinely hollow, dense and dark in a way that is difficult to describe to someone who has not felt it up close, but unmistakable to someone who has lived inside it. What had once been a full person was becoming a shell. That hollowness had been fed for years by two things: everything they refused to face in themselves, and everything they refused to let you become. Around that central figure, a cluster formed, a strange, small, brittle gathering of people who signed on, each for their own fractured reasons. Some were conscious participants, others were simply used as instruments, but among them was at least one figure whose specific role shaped everything else. someone who maintained access to your life while quietly reporting back. You may have genuinely liked this person. You may have trusted them. That proximity was the fuel that kept the operation informed and running. The operation itself was not loud. It did not announce itself or make dramatic moves. It worked through carefully placed words and precisely timed whispers. A comment about your character dropped into the right conversation, a subtle reframing of your motives offered to someone who was undecided about you, a reputation campaign so patient and so quiet that by the time you felt its effects, it had already been running long enough to shape perceptions you did not even know had been shaped. This is how sophisticated envy operates. It does not confront you directly. It works on the people around you before you even open your mouth, so that the ground has already been salted before you arrive anywhere. The people who were genuinely connected to you, the ones whose relationship with you was built on something real, could not be moved by those whispers. And over time, a campaign designed to poison perception around you began revealing far more about the one running it than it ever revealed about you. Slander is self-exposing. Patterns become undeniable to anyone paying attention. The people who truly have discernment eventually identify which direction the real rot is coming from. Keep this in mind, because it matters enormously in what comes later. If this resonates with your inner knowing, hype this video to help fellow chosen ones find their way here. Failure alone was never the goal. Failure was not satisfying enough for the scale of obsession being carried. What they wanted from you was surgical and specific. They wanted you completely stripped of resources, of support, of self-worth, of any sense of safe ground beneath your feet, and then they wanted to position themselves as the only available solution. They wanted to engineer your crisis, and then offer themselves as the rescue. They wanted you to be dependent on them, subservient to them, and genuinely grateful to the very person who had been orchestrating your collapse behind your back the entire time. Control through manufactured need, power through engineered helplessness. It is the oldest and darkest play in existence. Break someone down to the foundation, and then insert yourself as the foundation they have to stand on. They wanted to hold the rope while you dangled, and they wanted you to say thank you for it. Beyond the control, they wanted documentation. They wanted evidence of your lowest moments, archived somewhere they could return to whenever they needed it. Your suffering was not just a tool for them, it was the reward itself. The ability to revisit your pain and feel something was the only thing capable of filling the hollow inside them. Your worst chapters were, to them, a kind of private collection they could draw from when the emptiness inside them became too loud to ignore. And the interference did not stop at the emotional level. There were deliberate attempts to reach into your physical reality, things explored, researched and pursued that were specifically designed to make you genuinely unwell. The plan was never metaphorical. The intended harm was real. It was targeted, and it was meant to accelerate your collapse, so their rescue could arrive on the schedule they had designed. But notice something important. Right now you are hearing this. You are here. You are intact, thinking clearly, and moving forward. That is the first pivot in this entire arc, and it changes the direction of everything that follows from here. There was also a secondary layer built into what they constructed, the public discrediting element. Part of the plan was not just to break you privately, but to ensure that the breaking looked from the outside like your own doing. They wanted to set things up so that if you stumbled, the accepted explanation would be your own failure of character or judgment. They wanted to contaminate your reputation preemptively, so that even your survival would be framed entirely in their terms. They wanted to make sure that even if you made it out into a landscape they had already prepared against you. That layer failed as completely as every other layer they built. It failed because you kept growing, you kept showing up for yourself, and a person who is genuinely, consistently, visibly becoming something good is their own most powerful rebuttal. The living evidence of who you are will always, eventually, outlast any false narrative built around you. You've probably noticed a lot of Chosen One channels on YouTube have stopped publishing, videos pulled, voices silenced. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice. That's exactly why I'm putting you onto something real, Destiny Engine. I built this because I was done watching Chosen Ones get dragged through betrayal, isolation and attacks, while their enemies strutted around unchecked. I want to help you accelerate the speed of your divine justice and step fully into your purpose. And the beauty of it, you don't even have to lift a finger. Destiny Engine takes their downfall and flips it into your rise. This isn't another meditation app. It's declassified consciousness technology, the same mind programming tools your enemies once used to install fear, competition and scarcity, re-engineered to restore your sovereignty and align you with the cooperative, upgraded operating framework. It generates personalized sequences mapped to your divine purpose. The hardest thing you'll do is put on headphones, press play, and watch your enemies keep digging their own grave. Join Destiny Engine to support your favorite channels and use it for your own rise. It's a 360 win. Start your Destiny Engine trial today, risk-free, and turn everything they did to break you into fuel for your rise. Link in the description. Here is the truth. They were never able to solve. Their entire strategy was built on a flawed premise. They assumed that enough sustained pressure, applied from enough directions over enough time, would eventually cause you to fold. They calibrated their expectations against their own interior, and because they were hollow inside, they assumed you must be hollow too. They assumed that beneath your surface there was nothing more substantial than what existed beneath theirs. That assumption was the crack in the foundation of everything they built against you. Something in you does not yield to that kind of pressure. It is not stubbornness. It is not ego. It predates both of those things. It is a sovereign quality, a deep, original self that is anchored to something far beyond the reach of anyone's obsession or cruelty. That quality functioned as your protection. It was not a protection that blocked all pain. You felt every bit of the pain, and you carried it, and some of it came close to flattening you. But the core held. Every single time, without exception, the core held. And each time it held, something happened that no one on the other side of this ever predicted. You chose to heal. Not quickly, not cleanly, but one agonizing step at a time. You went back to the wound, instead of sealing it over. You processed, instead of suppressing. You sat with difficult truths instead of trading them for comfortable lies. You took the smallest available steps forward, even when the smallest step felt humiliating, because you understood somewhere deep in yourself that direction matters far more than speed. Every one of those choices built something they could not see. Every decision to feel instead of numb, to face instead of flee, to get up instead of stay down, you were constructing an interior architecture so solid that the specific category of harm they specialized in could no longer find purchase anywhere in you. You were not just surviving, you were becoming immune to the exact weapon being used against you. And here is the forward-pointing truth embedded in all of this. Every single attempt made to break you was functioning, entirely without anyone's intention, as reinforcement. Every attack sharpened your discernment. Every betrayal taught you something concrete about how betrayal operates and what it looks like before it fully arrives. Every manufactured confusion eventually resolved into a clarity you would not have reached any other way. The weapon they aimed at you was turning you into someone they would eventually have no tools to handle. Hold that thought, because it becomes the center of everything later. Now we go back further, because this did not begin in adulthood. There was a version of you that was younger, more open, and less equipped to name what was happening. The central figure in all of this knew that version of you. That figure may have had a direct hand in shaping it. What was done then was designed to install doubt in you before you were old enough to challenge it, to make you question your own perception so early and so consistently that the questioning became your automatic default. The cruelty was covert. It happened in moments when no one else was positioned to witness it, a meanness performed with precision and then concealed behind the perfectly maintained image of someone who would never behave that way. And when you reacted, when you cried or pushed back or tried to tell someone, the response was swift and crushing. You were making things up. You were too sensitive. You had misunderstood. That is simply how they are. And because the person causing the harm had spent so much time building a reputation in the opposite direction, you were the one who ended up doubting yourself rather than doubting them. So you learned something you were never supposed to learn. You learned to question your own knowing. You learned to defer your perception to the consensus of people who had been managed by someone with an agenda. You learned to carry a quiet, chronic uncertainty about whether your experience of reality could be trusted. This is not a character flaw in you. This is precisely what sustained covert harm does to any person who experiences it. The outcome was not about your strength. It was about the precision of the attack. But your body held the record when your mind was pressured to release it. The nervous system logs everything. And somewhere underneath all the conditioning and the learned self-doubt, the real you maintained a quiet grip on the truth, not loudly, not in ways that were immediately useful, but stubbornly and persistently, with a patience that outlasted everyone who tried to convince you that what happened did not happen the way you knew it did. That grip on your own truth is what eventually led you back to yourself. When you finally began to heal, when you went back and looked at the wound directly, you could see the pattern for exactly what it was. And once you could name the pattern, you could recognize it when it reappeared elsewhere, wearing different clothing, operating through different people, in entirely different environments. The same fundamental dynamic kept surfacing because there was a lesson in it that you were meant to fully receive. And instead of running from that lesson or collapsing under the weight of it, you eventually learned it completely. You now know the texture of this kind of energy in a way that cannot be faked or fast-tracked. You know what covert resentment feels like before it surfaces. You know the specific quality of warmth that has coldness underneath it. You know the kind of generosity that arrives attached to invisible conditions. That knowledge lives in your bones, and it is going to serve and protect you for the rest of your life. Now the momentum shifts, and it shifts decisively. The first crack appeared, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet withdrawal. The person who had been carrying intelligence about you, moving between your world and theirs, maintaining access to your emotional state and your daily movements, began stepping back. Perhaps the weight of what they were participating in became too heavy to carry. Perhaps the person at the center began showing signs of instability that made loyalty feel more like a liability than an advantage. Perhaps they ran their own calculation and realized the operation was not going to produce what it had originally promised. When that access closed, the operation went blind. Every plan launched from that point forward was aimed at a version of you that no longer existed, because you had already grown far past it. You had already changed significantly and permanently, and the people planning against you had no way of knowing that, because the pipeline of current information about you had gone completely dark. This is what caused the escalating series of failures that followed. Plan after plan was deployed against a target profile that was outdated and inaccurate. The results kept coming back wrong, and each failed attempt compounded the frustration, the panic, and the desperation of the person at the center, until the rage that had been serving as fuel began turning into something corrosive and unmanageable. Rage that cannot reach its target does not simply dissipate, it inverts. It begins consuming the one carrying it. The obsessive energy that had been directed outward at you for so long suddenly had nowhere constructive to go, so it turned inward into the body, into the relationships, into every area of life that had been neglected in favor of the campaign against you. And because the standard methods were failing, darker territory was explored. The search extended into ways to reach the harm without requiring proximity, things researched and pursued that crossed into genuinely dangerous ground, not only for you but for the one doing the pursuing. There is a cost to going into certain kinds of darkness. It marks the one who enters, it adheres to them, it opens them up to consequences that cannot be negotiated away or strategically managed after the fact. What gets deliberately invited in does not confine itself to the intended target, it spreads and it consumes, and right now the person who invited it in is living inside the full consequences of that decision. This is the turn the whole arc was building toward. There was no dramatic confrontation, there was no public reckoning, no forced moment of accountability with an audience present. The most devastating losses are rarely announced. They arrive quietly and privately, in the moment when the evidence becomes impossible to argue with any further. The loss became undeniable. The moment a comparison was made between your life and theirs, you were not at the rock bottom they had spent so long preparing for you. You were not broken, dependent, or reaching for the lifeline they had positioned themselves to offer. You were building, you were healing, you were becoming something with real substance and real momentum. And the person who had poured so much into preventing exactly that outcome was now looking at a life in ruins, financially strained, physically deteriorating, relationally depleted, and operating from a place of undisguised panic. The plan had failed, not in one area, but in every area simultaneously. And the most cutting detail of all was this: you were not looking back, you were not tracking their situation, or monitoring their collapse. You were not giving them the emotional reaction they had built the entire operation to provoke. Your gaze was forward, and your energy was fully invested in your own becoming. For someone whose entire sense of purpose had been organized around being the force you could not escape, your indifference was the one punishment they had never once calculated for. You did not need to confront them. You did not need to expose them, argue your case, or demand any acknowledgement. Your quiet, forward-moving existence was more devastating to them than any retaliation could ever have been, because it confirmed the thing they most feared, that you were going to be absolutely fine without them, in spite of them, and eventually so far beyond them that the distance would become impossible to close. Their panic is the confession, the escalating, poorly managed, increasingly visible unraveling of their composure is the admission that the war they started did not go the way they planned. The reputation they constructed against you is now beginning to collapse under the weight of the contradictions within their own behavior. You cannot spend years positioning someone else as the source of every problem and then visibly fall apart without the people observing, starting to revise their entire understanding of where the real problem actually lives. Vindication does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet, collective shift in how people read a situation. That shift is happening right now. The punishment is not a single event. It is a convergence, multiple consequences arriving simultaneously from every direction that was neglected in favor of the obsession with you. The financial ground is unstable. Opportunities that seemed assured are not materializing. Resources that appeared solid have proven temporary. Every area of career and livelihood that was deprioritized while energy was poured into pulling you down is now producing nothing, because nothing was planted there. You cannot harvest from ground you chose not to cultivate. Years of choosing demolition over construction have left nothing standing in those fields. The physical body is carrying the full weight of what the mind chose to sustain. The density of prolonged hatred, the obsessive mental energy, the dark material explored, the sustained dark intention maintained across an extended period, does not leave the body untouched. Chronically elevated states of resentment and obsession carry real physiological consequences. The sickness working its way through from the inside is not metaphor. It is the accumulated cost of what was carried and what was deliberately invited in. The body cannot be managed or manipulated the way external perceptions can be, and it is now presenting the full bill. The people who were supposedly in the inner circle are quietly recalculating their proximity. Alliances built on shared grievance have a natural ceiling. They hold for as long as the grievance produces something useful, and they dissolve the moment the cost of participation exceeds the reward. The ones who were most vocal in their participation are now the first to create distance. The confidants who held the details of the operation are making themselves increasingly scarce. What had functioned as a support structure is quietly disassembling, and the central figure is being left more and more alone with the one presence they most needed to escape themselves. The innermost world is in a state of chaos that cannot be hidden much longer. The volatility that always existed underneath the performance is now too large to contain. It surfaces in conversations that go sideways, in reactions disproportionate to the circumstances, in moments where the carefully maintained exterior slips just long enough to reveal something underneath that the people still present were not prepared to see. The only tools available for managing any of this are the ones that have always been used: manipulation and deflection, and those tools have stopped working. When the only instruments a person ever developed no longer function, there is nothing left to reach for. This is the punishment. It is precise, it is total, and it is entirely self-administered. Every consequence is the direct return of a choice that was made, and you had nothing to do with any of it except refuse to be destroyed. Every single thing done against you, every covert cruelty, every whispered campaign, every manufactured doubt, every attempt to keep you beneath a ceiling you did not build and did not deserve, was entirely without anyone's intention, a curriculum. It was the most rigorous, most advanced training in human discernment that exists. And you graduated from it, while the people who unknowingly enrolled you in it had no idea they were serving as your instructors. You now carry something that cannot be purchased, simulated, or accelerated through any shortcut. You carry the specific wisdom that develops in a person who has been targeted by sophisticated deception and chose repeatedly, at great personal cost, to heal rather than harden. You carry the calibration that forms in someone who has felt the precise texture of hidden malice and learned to recognize its early signals long before it reveals itself. You carry the groundedness that only develops in a person who has been tested at the depth you have been tested and discovered, to the surprise of everyone, including yourself at times, that the foundation holds. You know things in your body that other people only understand intellectually, if they understand them at all. You know what covert resentment feels like before it announces itself. You know the specific quality of attention that presents itself as love, but is actually appetite. You know how manufactured closeness feels different in the nervous system from genuine connection. These are not small things. These are life-altering capacities, and you carry every one of them now. And here is the dimension of this that extends far beyond your personal life. The mission you are here for, the specific reason your particular combination of wounds and gifts and hard-earned clarity exists in the configuration it does, is not only about you. The depth you carry is transmissible. It reaches people who are still in the middle of what you survived, people who are still asking themselves whether a way through is even possible, whether real healing is available to them, whether the damage they carry is permanent. Your presence and your energy answer that question before a single word is spoken. They tried to stop one person. They inadvertently forged a lighthouse instead, and the light from that lighthouse is going to reach further than either of you can currently see. The resolution of this arc is not rest, it is acceleration. Something is opening in your path right now, not because the hard work is finished, since growth is ongoing, but because the specific obstruction that was being held against you has been removed. The energy that was being drained by constant vigilance, by the chronic low-grade awareness that something in your environment was actively working against you, belongs to you again, all of it, and a person of your caliber with access to their full energy is not a small or quiet thing. A guide is entering your life, or has already arrived at the edges of it, someone who sees the complete version of you, Not the survival mode version or the performance version, but the actual sovereign self underneath, and who recognizes immediately what they are looking at. This person carries understanding that was not learned from credentials or formal courses. It was transmitted through lineage, through direct experience, through the kind of accumulated depth that only develops over a long period of genuine seeking. Through this connection you will access dimensions of yourself that you have been circling but have not yet fully stepped into, a deeper relationship with your own instincts, a more direct connection to your own authority, and a clarity about your direction that has been partially obscured until now. The material abundance arriving in your life is proportional and real. The right opportunities are beginning to appear through channels that were blocked before. The right people are finding you, or you are finding them, with an ease that would have seemed impossible during the densest chapters of what you went through. The recognition you deserve professionally, within your community, and in the broader world, is no longer being intercepted on its way to you. It is arriving, and understand this about all of it: none of what is coming is compensation for suffering. You are not being rewarded simply for having been hurt. What is arriving is the natural result of who you became while being hurt. A person of genuine depth, discernment, resilience and purpose is magnetically attractive to good things. The resources and connections and opportunities that align with your actual quality of being were always going to arrive. The only question was whether you would reach this point intact enough to receive them. You did. The opposition against you was never only about stopping your personal life. At its deepest level, it was an attempt to prevent everything your becoming would eventually produce, every person you would reach, every door your presence would open for someone who needed it opened, every life that would be quietly altered by contact with the depth and discernment you carry. The interference was aimed at the entire downstream of your becoming, not just at the source. It failed at all of it, and now that downstream is flowing without obstruction for the first time, before the close you need to hear this clearly. At some point, perhaps already, perhaps still approaching, the person at the center of all of this is going to make a final move. When the panic becomes loud enough, when the available options have been exhausted one by one, when the list of strategies has run to its very bottom, there is one approach that has not yet been tried. It will arrive disguised as peace, not genuine peace, performed peace. A carefully calibrated approach, warm, conciliatory, framed in the language of maturity and mutual healing and moving forward together. It may come directly or through an intermediary. It will feel disarming. It will speak to the part of you that is genuinely gracious and genuinely open to believing that people can change when they choose to. Here is what you do. You trust what you know. You are not required to be cold or confrontational. You do not need to make any declaration or defend your position to anyone. You simply do not reopen the access quietly, completely, and not from bitterness or fear, but from the clarity that was earned through everything you survived. That clarity knows precisely what granting proximity to this person has historically cost you, and it knows what the actual terms of any renewed connection would be, regardless of how different those terms are framed on the surface. A boundary held without drama is one of the most powerful expressions of sovereignty a person can demonstrate. It requires no explanation, it makes no noise, it simply exists. And the peace you built through all that inner work, through all those unglamorous, lonely, necessary choices to heal when no one was watching, is its own complete and sufficient justification. There is also something underneath the surface of this approach that you need to recognize clearly. The reach for reconciliation from someone like this is not evidence of growth. It is the last available resource of a person who has exhausted every other option. You are not responsible for the gap that opened in their life when their operation collapsed. That gap existed long before you entered the picture and would exist regardless of any choice you made or did not make. Filling that gap is not your assignment, and accepting it as your assignment would cost you everything you have built. Your assignment is forward. completely, permanently, and without apology. The guide is arriving, the abundance is building, the vindication is unfolding quietly and undeniably. Every door that was being held shut is opening now. The effect of your becoming is moving outward in ways you will spend the rest of your life discovering, not as a reward for suffering, but as the natural destination of someone who chose over and over again in the dark, with no guarantee of outcome, to keep becoming anyway. Walk into what is next, like you own it, because you do. Keep the discernment sharp and the boundaries firm and the heart open to what is genuinely good. Keep doing the work. Keep showing up for yourself with the consistency and loyalty you always deserved from others. That commitment to your own sovereign becoming is the engine of everything still on its way to you. They came for the chosen one. Now the whole world is about to find out what that means. Go show them.